So, the economy that Gen Z has entered is one of the worst in US history, and it feels like nobody even really cares about it. So, starting out with wages and what people are making, adjusted for inflation, young workers' earnings have remained largely flat since about 2000, especially when we're factoring in inflation. For example, the average earner's early career in 2000 made about 30K a year. In today's dollars, that's 58,000, and that's considered a pretty solid salary in plenty of low-cost living areas in the US. However, as we all know, and I'm sure we're feeling it with the squeeze in our wallets, living costs have increased dramatically. So the ratio of home prices to median income has increased from a factor of 4x in about 2000, so 4x your income, to currently 5.3 times as much as the household income, because the household income in 2000 earned about 50K a year, and the average home price was around like 160 to $200,000. Now the median household in the U.S. makes about 80K, but the median prices of houses has increased to over $43,000. So as we all know, it's taking a lot longer to buy a house now. I feel like, we all have had this American dream ingrained into our minds since we were all kids. It was something everybody talked about, right? The American dream is getting a good job, going to college, or going to college first, getting a good job, and then buying a home, starting a family. And it feels like that is like slowly becoming super unachievable. Like it's something everybody wants. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants a home. They want a solid paying job. But it feels like you have to fight tooth and nail to even get there because, for us young folks that, don't have a house yet, rent now costs over 30% of our paychecks on average. And in many high cost of living areas, it can be as much as 50%, which is among the highest levels in American history. Of course, since COVID, grocery prices have also increased dramatically, averaging about a 25% increase in recent years. And so it's not just homes, but it's also the essentials that we need, things that we're not even going to ever consider discretionary income, because once we're figuring out our budgets, figuring out how we're going to allocate our income, it just feels like we just can't win with prices like groceries, gas now, rent, all these things that are absolutely essential to our budgets. We're now sort of having to parse out. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the ads for Klarna's buy now, pay later. I saw a report recently that on Coachella, people were using the buy now, pay later option at record levels, which is just insane to think about. Buy now, pay later, zero interest fees on a concert ticket. That's a pretty harsh indicator for where we are, as things currently stand. Another thing to keep in mind is student debt and credit card interest levels, which have remained consistently pretty high. And while college, on the one hand, remains an excellent way to get a higher paying job, it feels like nowadays a lot of people are getting master's degrees or in a stronger position to earn more because of it. However, it's a double sided sword when it comes to the master's degree because, on the one hand, while it does get you better opportunities and more leverage in salary negotiations early on in your career, at the same time, it's much more difficult to get private funding for them, meaning you risk putting yourself into significantly more student debt. So the trade-off being like it's a little more guaranteed that you'll get a job maybe in the field that you want, maybe not, because everybody is reading AI on their resumes, or they're using AI HR bots to parse through all of these cover letters. So you're putting yourself in even more debt to still have not that great of a chance of getting a solid job. And so, college prices have also steadily increased, whereas earning wages, adjusted for inflation since 1980 have remained roughly the same. On top of that, credit card interest rates, are currently in the high 20s for a lot of people who are applying for new lines, who are younger. So if you're carrying a credit card balance, it feels like you're consistently just only paying off interest just because of how high the interest rates themselves are. Additionally, the average car payment for a new car is now around $742 a month for a new car, and a used car payment is around $530 per month. So even just getting around to get to these job interviews in the first place, or these, lowball early career corporate jobs, it's just that much harder. So yeah, it's a lot of doom and gloom. I'm saying, it is a lot harder to build wealth today than it was 15 years ago. And it feels like a humiliation ritual in a lot of ways. It's brutal to try and find a job And every job listing that's available there on an Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever, it feels like it's just been set up to scrape your data. I know everybody's been having those spam calls lately, so it's, something I'm sure that we can all relate to. And, even if you do end up getting a job, it feels like you're constantly living paycheck to paycheck. And statistically, according to a payments intelligence survey, around 70% of Gen Z report living paycheck to paycheck. And this figure has increased from 57% in January 2023. Now, I would take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because a lot of us are just still getting out of college. But I would wager definitely for those that are among early career, yes, they're definitely living paycheck to paycheck. So, debt, of course, plays a key role in this factor because the average Gen Z graduate carries about $23,000 in student debt. So, even if you're, if you have less student debt or maybe, you're even debt free, I'm sure that with these costs of living and with the current state of salaries being paid out for early career earners, it's definitely not feeling like the deck isn't stacked against you. At least for me, I know I feel that way. And I think the grandest irony of it all is that while worker productivity has risen by over 60% in the last 50 years, I don't even know how you quantify that, but I'm just going to take it and run with it. Real wages have only grown, adjusted for inflation, of course, 17%, whereas corporations are reporting record profits. Corporate profit growth largely outpaces typical worker pay. So, the myth of trickle-down economics just is really not happening here. I wish it was. If only corporate profits translated towards better earnings, I think we'd all, be a lot better off. So, while I know this is a lot of doom and gloom, there is still a way to fight back and build wealth because a lot of Gen Z, we have the advantage of information, but we have the disadvantage of the current economic conditions. But information is wealth, as we know. The only problem is a lot of us are prone to social media, which promotes a false sense of reality. So it focuses on building your wealth fast, like a crypto bro, wealth, cars, social status. These are all things that matter a lot to us because we've been conditioned it through our use of social media in our early adulthood. And the reality is that when it comes to building wealth, especially earlier on in life, it's not going to be you. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be the vast majority of my peers. I'm not here to advocate for risky trades and gambling. We're not Wall Street bets boys over here that are willing to YOLO, 50K on rare gourds. That's just not something that we can ever really advocate for because building wealth is a deliberate, slow, and consistent choice. So focusing on consistent long-term investing in low-cost index funds like your VOOs, VTIs, VTs, these are great, consistent, easy to invest in some platforms I'm pretty sure you can automate, and they have a reliable track record. This is what you need to be working on in the background. In the foreground, you need to be stacking valuable skills, learning trades, pursuing side hustles, or maybe doing professional courses to augment your resume. This will create opportunities like freelance work to create additional financial stability beyond your main job. Because as we know, your main job may not be as reliable as you would think it is. And that's just the unfortunate reality of the job market that we're in these days. And finally, maintaining a consistent savings rate. Even at a lower income, even if you're on a lower paying hourly job, maintaining some form of savings is crucial because nearly 40% of Americans can't cover a $500 emergency fund. That's really bad. Maintaining some form of savings, there's always going to be an emergency expense that you have to cover. So making sure grocery money isn't on the line when your car breaks down, that should be priority number one, because how the hell are you going to build wealth if you can't cover yourself when shit goes sideways? So what I would advocate for is, especially when it comes to building those early bits of wealth, it might feel a little disheartening to open up your, Robinhood and see only that the S&P 500 went up 1% today and your investment didn't really grow all that much. If you adopt a win-win investing mindset, this can sort of change that perspective because a lot of people will say you're buying the top. I've heard this from friends. When I advocate for low-cost index investing, they say, "Oh, but you're buying the top. The market could crash." And if you buy consistently, you're always going to catch those dips. The reality is you're always either buying at an all-time high or you're getting a discount. Buying at either time is great because ultimately this wealth that you're building isn't going to matter a whole lot. It's going to be in the background for the next 10, 20 years. So if you just treat it that way, you'll be much, much better off. So In summation, guys, while the system may be imbalanced and stacked against you, the information is out there. And so deliberately choosing to build your skill set, build your future right now, while, things are tough, can build those habits that'll carry over so well once you're more financially stable. So guys, as always, thank you for watching. Stay easy. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.